Number 8. Unexplained skeletons of Roopkund Lake. In 1942, an Indian forest official named H.K. Madwal discovered something strange while exploring Roopkund Lake. He found a large mass full of hundreds of human skeletons. The freezing temperatures of the Himalayas had helped preserve the remains for centuries. In the 1950s, the strange discovery was finally made public, and since then, many investigations have tried to unravel the mystery. First, it was believed that the bodies may have been Japanese soldiers or Tibetan traders that died on the Silk Road, perhaps through some sort of epidemic or by harsh weather. But it was noted that no weapons were found at the site, and later, forensic analysis revealed that the skeletons were of Indian descent, dating back to the 9th century. So how exactly did they get there? Scientists like Veena Mushrif Tripathi, a member of an investigation team in 2004, noted that although there were no weapons, there were remnants of musical instruments. The route also seemed to line up with the Nanda Devi Raj Jat Yatra, a Hindu pilgrimage that happens roughly every 12 years and is still practiced to this day. So Mushrif Tripathi and her team figured out that the remains belonged to pilgrims and some local guides. But what was more surprising was how all of these people actually died. Most of the skeletons experienced trauma to the skull, but this wasn't caused by a fierce battle. All of these people died in a massive hailstorm that pelted them in a singular fatal weather event. Although this is the theorized scientific explanation for the deaths, the entire area is steeped in rich folklore and myths, including tales of angry goddesses who punish unworthy pilgrims. In fact, another research team in 2019 used genome analysis to reveal more details about the mysterious remains. A 5-year-long study was conducted on the Roopkund Lake victims. Bone samples from the 38 skeletons that were stored at the Anthropological Survey of India in Kolkata were sent to 16 international labs for analysis. The results shocked the world. The study found that the 38 skeletons belonged to 3 different groups and were deposited in the lake during several events over a period of 1,000 years. The first group was of South Asian descent, and their bones were deposited between the 7th and 10th centuries. The second group consisted of individuals with Eastern Mediterranean ancestry from the island of Crete who died in the 19th century. Lastly, there was a sample of Southeast Asian origin, also from around the 19th century. The researchers were so surprised by the group with Eastern Mediterranean ancestry that they did a dietary analysis to see if it supported the DNA results, and it did. This caused the mystery to open up even further. Instead of simply looking at Indian pilgrims from the 9th century, the skeletons at Roopkund Lake spanned multiple ages and the world. These findings beg the question, how did these other groups end up here? The answer is that scientists still don't know, and even the theories as to the original group dying from a massive hailstorm have been disproven. Maybe it was altitude sickness, or perhaps the local legends of vengeful goddesses are actually true. Number 7. Diving bell spiders. For those of you with arachnophobia, you might be surprised that our 8-legged friends also live underwater. Almost nowhere is safe. The diving bell spider is native to certain regions of Europe and Asia, and is usually found on small freshwater sources like ponds, streams, and lakes. The species has grown so used to being underwater that it only really needs to go up to the surface once a day for air. But how is a spider able to breathe underwater? The answer is hidden in its name. The spider creates a diving bell, which is a small bubble of air that the creatures carry with it underwater. The spider then spins a silk web between the aquatic plants and anchors it to the plants with small drops of silk. After this, the spider swims up to the surface and captures a bubble of air, which it carries down to its silk web. The diving bell spider repeats this process until the silk web is completely covered in bubbles of air, creating small pockets that look a bit like an umbrella the spider can use to breathe. The diving bell it creates is so impressive it means that the spider can spend most of its life underwater. It's able to eat, sleep, and even reproduce within the air pockets. Thankfully, the diving bell spider is only an inch in size, so it's not as freaky as a giant tarantula. But this spider can still pack quite the nasty bite. Although it isn't deadly, it can still break the skin and cause both inflammation and swelling. Number 6. a sunken airplane off the Scottish coast. Browsing through Google Earth can often lead to some strange and wonderful discoveries. But one man stumbled upon something pretty disturbing: what looked like an entire aircraft under the waves. Robert Morton from South Yorkshire in the UK was browsing around the Scottish coast of Edinburgh on Google Maps when he suddenly spotted what looked to be an aircraft in the water. It was 9 miles away from the nearest airport, but given how clear the image was, it looked like it was in pretty shallow waters. Curious, Morton decided to look into whether or not there had been any plane crashes that matched the description of what he was seeing, but nothing came up. As a result, Morton thought it was just a glitch, and that Google satellite imagery had somehow recorded a plane taking off, with the cloud cover above making it seem like it was actually under the waves. One thing is for sure, he's probably not going to forget this discovery for quite some time. What's the craziest thing you've managed to find on Google Maps? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 5. The conical structure of Kinneret. Archaeologists in 2013 found something fascinating inside the Sea of Galilee. They discovered a huge, man-made structure made up of basalt cobbles and boulders. The column is massive, measuring about 229 feet in diameter, and it's about 718 feet below sea level. The archaeologists who made the discovery include Yitzhak Paz, Moshe Reshef, Zvi Ben Avraham, Shmuel Marco, Gideon Tibor, and Danny Nadal, and they reported their findings to the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology. Upon closer inspection by scuba divers, they realized that the boulders used in the structure are up to 3.5 feet long and have no discernible construction patterns. They also have no signs of cutting or chiseling. So why would anyone make this, and what purpose did it have? Researchers put forward a couple of ideas as to what it might have been used for. One possibility is that it was built by a marine-based economy, since the structure attracts fish. In this case, it would have been intentionally built underwater. The team noted that there are other stone structures in the Sea of Galilee that are widely believed to be ancient fish nurseries, but they're much smaller, with diameters of only 13.5 feet, and they're also found near the shores. On the other hand, it's also possible that the structure was actually built onshore back when the water level was lower than today. Other historians have also noted the column's similarity to a cairn, an ancient burial mound that is usually signified by many boulders placed on top of one another. The structure is believed to be about 4,000 years old. This tells archaeologists that there were advanced people living in the area at the time who had the ability to shape the basalt. Even with this, we're still not sure of the column's true purpose. Number 4. Goblin sharks. The goblin shark is one of the creepiest animals we've ever discovered in the ocean. They have long snouts that sit flat on top of their head, and they can move their mouth from way up by their eyes to all the way to the front of their faces. Their flabby body is grayish pink in color, and their teeth look like tiny needles poking out of their mouth. This makes them incredibly freaky to look at, leaving many to be terrified of them. But thankfully, goblin sharks don't actually pose a threat to humans, and it's rare for a person to come into contact with one while they're swimming or diving in the ocean. This is because the creatures normally live at a depth of about 3,600 feet. The goblin shark's scary and unusual appearance is what helped it become an expert hunter of its food. Goblins are opportunistic predators that feed on prey including fish, squid, and crustaceans. They use their long snouts to sense the electrical fields given off by their food on the sandy floor of the seabed, allowing them to detect and locate possible meals. Once it has detected something, it's able to snap its jaws forward faster than any other shark species, something scientists liken to a slingshot. Number 3. Sem Fim. Sem Fim was a Brazilian ship that sank and froze in the Antarctic ice on April 7, 2012. The yacht belonged to a well-known Brazilian journalist named João Lara Mesquita, and it was being used to film a documentary about the Antarctic coast when it suddenly capsized. The yacht was manned by a crew of 4 people at the time. It happened in Maxwell Bay of Ardley Cove, about 750 miles south of South America. During the incident with the Sem Fim yacht, the crew members faced seriously strong winds, blowing at over 62 miles an hour. One of the crew even likened it to being on a bucking bronco during a rodeo. Eventually, the boat got caught in the ice, and the crew had to radio out for help. Luckily, the Chilean Navy base in Bahia Fildes heard their call and came out to the rescue. Unfortunately, bad weather conditions made the rescue effort take 2 days longer than originally planned. Thankfully, all 4 crew members were rescued safely. And also, unfortunately, the ship couldn't be saved. The super cold water that splashed onto its deck froze and caused the hull to split apart and expand. This is called compression, and it's what ultimately caused Sem Fim to sink to the bottom of the shallow Maxwell Bay. The boat stayed underwater for almost a year, about 30 feet deep, but it was still preserved and visible from above. Finally, in early 2013, a team was able to rescue the boat and recover its equipment, but the Sem Fim was well beyond repair. One of the things that will remain with the crew was that as they were waiting for rescue, they slowly saw the Sem Fim sink beneath the waves with their lights still shining and casting a ghostly shadow over the frigid ice. Number 2. Deep-sea dragonfish. The deep-sea dragonfish is a fierce predator that lives in the deepest sections of the ocean and is sometimes referred to as the scaleless dragonfish. It's a small fish, only about 6 inches long, but don't let the size fool you. It has huge teeth compared to the rest of its body. Its scientific name is Grammatostomys flagellobarba, and it's definitely not a fish you'd want to pick a fight with. Living at a depth of 5,000 feet underwater, the deep-sea dragonfish surrounds itself in the pitch-black waters of the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. Alongside its large teeth, which are angled inwards to hook into prey, the deep-sea dragonfish has another trick up its sleeve. It's able to use bioluminescence, using an organ called a photophore, to create its own light. It uses this artificial light to attract prey. It moves its barbel, which is a small thin protrusion on its chin, similar to a lure on a fishing rod, in order to bait fish and other sea creatures. Since a lot of its prey also produce their own light, the dragonfish has evolved a special trick. The walls of its stomach are black, which helps to hide any light produced by the prey as it digests the most recent meal. This way, the dragonfish can stay hidden and avoid any unwanted attention from other predators. It truly is lights out for anything that gets caught up in its jaws. And at number 1, the SS Rio Grande. One of the deepest shipwrecks in the world is the SS Rio Grande. In fact, it actually received a record from the Guinness Book of World Records until the discovery of the USS Johnson came in 2019. The SS Rio Grande was a German blockade runner that sank off the coast of Brazil thanks to 2 US ships in January 1944. Only 72 members of the ship's crew survived the attack, with the rest of the vessel ending up beneath the waves. The SS Rio Grande was so deep that it wasn't until 1996 when it was found. The find was made by Blue Water Recoveries on November 28th of that year using sonar technology and was confirmed by the use of a remotely operated diving machine. But just how deep down is the SS Rio Grande? It sits 3.5 miles below the surface. Although the SS Rio Grande and the SS Johnson are some of the deepest shipwrecks found, there are still so many boats out there on the seabed that have yet to be discovered. Some of them may lie even deeper than we can currently reach. Number 10. The SS Rio Grande. According to Guinness World Records, the SS Rio Grande has been identified as the deepest shipwreck in the world. The vessel is a World War II-era German blockade runner that sank in January of 1944 after running into Allied forces in the South Atlantic Ocean. It's situated at a depth of around 18,900 feet, which is over 3.5 miles beneath the surface, and it was discovered on November 28, 1996, thanks to side-scanning sonar technology. The company responsible for the find, Blue Water Recoveries, confirmed the wreck's location 2 days after using a remotely operated vehicle. The SS Rio Grande now rests at the bottom of the ocean, 5 miles from the coast of Brazil. Types of blockade runners were once used to transport cargo, and when this one sank, it was carrying 2,370 tons of copper, 500 tons of tin, and 311 tons of cobalt. The vessel also carried a precious cargo of rubber, most of which washed up on several beaches along the Brazilian coast 74 years later. Number 9. Anomaly on the seafloor. In 2022, scientists spotted something unusual at more than 8,000 feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean. What they found was a bizarre line of nearly perfect spaced holes on the seafloor. According to the U.S. National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, The origin of the holes has researchers completely stumped, even after exploring the area with a remote-operated vehicle. The expertly aligned holes look like they could have been created from human activity. However, zoologist Mike Vecchione with the National Museum of Natural History isn't convinced that the pattern is man-made. He worked on and watched the dive that discovered the odd holes and later told Mashable that there's no way that they were created by humans. Vecchione instead has two theories of his own as to what could have created the sets of holes. He believes that either a marine animal burrowed through the seafloor horizontally, occasionally pushing up holes to get oxygenated water for ventilation, or that a creature swam above the surface of the sea sediment and stopped every once in a while to poke something into the sandy floor. In 2004, similar holes were discovered by Vecchione and Odd Axel Bergstad, a marine researcher, during a dive they completed together to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. However, nobody has invested their time and money to investigate why these holes form. During the more recent expedition in 2022, scientists collected water samples from the mysterious holes to see if they couldn't detect environmental DNA, which is basically genetic material that an organism leaves behind in their environment. Researchers have yet to analyze the water samples, but once they do, they'll be able to identify what animals live in the vicinity and possibly solve who created the holes in the first place. Number 8. Siphonophores. Did you know that there's conjoined twins that live in our planet's oceans? They're called siphonophores. They belong to a family that's made up of around 180 species. They look like gelatinous strings and can grow up to 100 feet long, making them one of the longest creatures in the world. However, instead of growing as a single organism like most other animals, siphonophores have the ability to clone themselves. They can do this thousands of times, resulting in a half-dozen different kinds of specialized clone bodies that all cling together and work as a team, an extremely deadly team at that. These creatures are made up of hundreds of tentacles that contain powerful neurotoxins that can take down even the most admirable foes. These incredible animals inhabit the deep oceans at depths of around 2,000 feet, but they've been found by ocean explorers existing as deep as 6,600 feet. One of these siphonophores was spotted in 2020 off the coast of Western Australia. According to Nerida Wilson of the Western Australian Museum, you couldn't miss it, and it was absolutely huge. It was suspended in a giant spiral, and the team believed it to be a new species, one that resembled a tangled feather boa. The spiral arrangement is apparently a feeding posture for these types of siphonophores. When they feed, they envelop their prey before digesting them, and afterward the meal is dispersed throughout the colony through its stem like a giant straw that reaches every single clone. Number 7. Ancient deep-sea turtle. In 2016, a hiker in the Pyrenees Mountains of northern Spain stumbled upon the remains of a giant marine turtle. The specimen was a previously unknown species, and now it's the biggest sea turtle that's ever been found in present-day Europe. The species was named Leviathanocales enigmatica, after the word Leviathan, which is a term for sea monster that's typically seen in the Bible. They can reach lengths of more than 10 feet from head to tail, but until recently, they were only thought to inhabit the waters surrounding North America. The animal's unusual presence in this region of the prehistoric world proves that giant turtles were a lot more common than previously thought. These turtles had the ability to hold their breath much longer than their modern-day counterparts in order to reach depths in the ocean so they could find food or escape larger predators. It's not known for certain exactly how deep they could go, but the leatherback turtle that exists today can dive over 3,000 feet. Which means that this turtle likely reached depths of 4,000 feet or more. The research team that examined the turtle's remains from Spain's Autonomous University of Barcelona's Miquel Crucifont Catalan Institute of Paleontology believes the ancient animal lived throughout the Campanian age of the late Cretaceous epoch, which would make it around 72 million years old. In the near future, researchers hope to revisit the fossil site where the turtle remains were initially found to look for more bones, as they aren't certain that all the fragments from this specimen have been located. Number 6. The USS Hornet. Researchers have located the USS Hornet's final resting place deep in the South Pacific Ocean. Back in October of 1942, the aircraft carrier that served in the Second World War was sunk during the Battle of Santa Cruz Island that was fought against the Japanese Navy. When the Hornet capsized, its 2,000 crew members were forced to abandon ship resulting in 111 deaths. Overhead sonar images that were taken shows the carrier sitting eerily upright and almost perfectly intact on the desolate and dark ocean floor. The USS Hornet was discovered in late January of 2019 by the research vessel called RV Petrel at nearly 17,500 feet in the waters around the Solomon Islands. The aircraft carrier shows little sign of buildup from ocean life or deterioration because of the depth of where it's located, and photos of the wreck are creepy to say the least. One image in particular shows an aircraft tug, still fitted with its black rubber tires, gripping the Hornet's deck where it would have moved aircraft into the right positions. A sign that reads International Harvester, the tug's maker, is still clearly visible on top of its engine. The anti-aircraft weapons that were once used to fend off the fierce bombardment from Japanese aircraft are also visible on the sea floor. Number 5. A 100-million-year-old fossil. A study from 2014 revealed that the deep sea could be the origin of many lineages of marine creatures found closer to the surface, like several species of sea stars, snails, and urchins. These recent findings suggest that the deep sea played a much greater role in preserving and producing diversity in sea life than previously thought. For a long time, the deep sea was believed to be a lifeless desert where no animal could survive. But in the last few decades, it's been revealed that it supports some of the highest levels of biodiversity on the planet. With help from Carroll A, an amateur paleontologist, scientists discovered 100-million-year-old deep-sea animal fossils in the Austrian Alps. These specimens have since shed light on the shocking history of deep-sea life. A landslide that occurred near the city of Salzburg in Glassenbach Gorge exposed the fossils. Then, over the next decade, the fossils were collected by Moosleitner, who informed his colleagues of the treasure trove he'd found. Around 2,500 fossils were recovered from this site, including the oldest known members of some groups of deep-sea creatures that still exist today. These fossils were analyzed by Moosleitner and his paleontologist colleagues and were found to predate earlier findings by over 25 million years, suggesting that shallow water animals may have evolved from deep-sea ancestors. Number 4. Erythenus plasticus. The presence of plastic has been uncovered in a previously unknown deep-sea amphipod, which was first discovered in the Mariana Trench, the world's deepest underwater gorge. The new species was named Erythenus plasticus because of the plastic it's digested. And according to Dr. Alan Jamieson, marine ecology lecturer for Newcastle University, the name was also chosen to highlight the fact that immediate action needs to be taken in order to stop the deluge of plastic into our planet's oceans. Jamieson, who also happens to be the head of the research mission, noted that we're at a point now where newly discovered species from unexplored habitats are already being found contaminated with plastic. Erythenus plasticus lives at over 19,600 feet below sea level, a depth that's hardly been explored, and yet it's already ingested the pollutant. According to Oceanographic magazine, an estimated 8 million metric tons of plastic enters our oceans every single year. To put that into perspective, that's the equivalent of an entire truckload of plastic every minute of every day. Once in the water, the pollutant breaks down into microplastics, which then spreads throughout the rest of the ocean, where it's subsequently ingested by marine life. Luckily though, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF in Germany, has launched a petition that's already been signed by over 1.6 million people across the globe. They're encouraging people to call on their local governments to commit to reduce plastic waste internationally and to improve waste management as a whole. Hopefully, in the future, we'll live in a world that's not plagued by microplastics. Number 3. Ice finger of death. Brinicles are hardly observed in real time, although they've been known to exist since the 1960s. Brinicles are finger-like formations that grow underneath sea ice, resulting in a formation that's often called an ice finger of death. Typically, this phenomenon only occurs in specific conditions, like those that are found in the polar regions of the globe beneath giant blocks of floating sea ice. Ice on the surface of the ocean is composed of two elements, unlike frozen freshwater. The ice crystal is relatively pure, since during the freezing process the water exudes most of the salt. The salty water that remains subsequently stays liquid thanks to its lowered freezing temperature, and because of this, highly saline brine channels are created within the porous ice block. A Brinicle then forms when the sea ice cracks, allowing the saline water to leak out into the open oceans. And since the brine is heavier than the surrounding water, it sinks to the seafloor while continuing to freeze the relatively fresh water that comes into contact with it. This process allows the Brinicle, or ice finger of death, to grow downward, sometimes catching bottom-dwelling creatures around it like starfish and sea urchins. Number 2. Pelican eel. The pelican eel has a large, scoop-like jaw and typically doesn't grow bigger than about 3 feet in length. These marine creatures inhabit the oceans at depths of 1,600 to 9,800 feet, and unlike their Twilight Zone buddies, they remain in the deep ocean while their counterparts migrate to the surface to find dinner. The pelican eel is sometimes referred to as the umbrella mouth gulper, since it seems to be the most appropriate out of all of its nicknames. These animals have the ability to expand their stomach and throat in order to accommodate food, as well as the copious amounts of water it slowly expels through its gills. When the eel encounters prey, it blows up its mouth to insane dimensions, creating a huge net that can scoop up a swarm of shrimp or a squid with relative ease. Its balloon-like capabilities is a beneficial adaptation for an opportunistic eater, since the small teeth that line the eel's jaw would hardly do the trick alone. Despite the frightening size of its mouth, the pelican eel isn't a particularly strong hunter. Its eyes are extremely small compared to other deep-sea creatures, so it can't solely rely on its sight to locate prey. Instead, it uses a pink or red light on its rear fins to lure in its next meal. The pelican eel also isn't much of a swimmer, due to its whip-like tail and its lack of pelvic fins, scales, and swim bladders, so it just drifts around in the deep ocean, tempting prey with its bioluminescent lights. And at number 1, discovery at 10,000 feet. In 2019, an elephant tusk was discovered sitting at a depth of over 10,000 feet, submerged beneath an underwater mountain called a seamount. It was located roughly 150 miles off the coast of California by researchers with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. The tusk was found by a team using a remotely operated underwater vehicle. After a delicate operation, the researchers managed to bring the artifact back up to the surface 2 years later, which was when it was confirmed to be a real mammoth tusk from the lower Paleolithic era of the planet's Pleistocene period. It measured 3 feet in length and was believed to come from a Columbian mammoth, an ancient hybrid between a steppe mammoth and a woolly mammoth. Further analysis on the tusk revealed that it was at least 100,000 years old, and according to researchers, it belonged to a young female that passed away on the coast and was carried far out to sea by the ocean currents. The fossil has since been scheduled to undergo a CT scan, which will hopefully reveal more information about the mammoth and where it came from, but at the moment, it's unclear what the tests reveal.
8. MV Joyita. Built in 1931 as a wooden luxury yacht for American film director Roland West, the 69-foot-long, 21 meters MV Joyita, or Little Jewel, was named after its owner's wife. It was called to duty in World War II and served as a naval yard patrol vessel. After the war ended, the Joyita fell back into private ownership as a fishing and trading boat. Its last voyage came in 1951, when it left Samoa for the Tokelau Islands with one working engine and a cargo of medical supplies, oil, food, and some other items. It was already running a day late due to mechanical problems, and the 27 crew members and passengers were eager to get going. The 270-mile, 430-kilometer journey should have taken 2 days or less, but the Joyita failed to arrive at its destination as planned. It never sent a distress signal, and an extensive search and rescue mission failed to turn up any sign of the missing boat. 5 weeks after it became overdue, a merchant ship captain spotted the partially submerged Joyita more than 600 miles, 970 kilometers off course. Its captain, crew, and 4 tons of cargo were nowhere to be found, and all the lifeboats were gone. There was some structural damage to the vessel, and the radio was tuned into an international distress channel, but the radio's cable was broken, limiting its range to about 2 miles, 3.2 kilometers. The starboard deck was covered in mattresses, and there were some bloody bandages laying next to a bag of first aid supplies. The Joyita was in poor condition, so it wasn't surprising that it had encountered problems at sea. But the boat was extra buoyant thanks to its cork-lined holds, so there was little chance of it sinking. And the decision to abandon ship made little sense to investigators. They theorized that the captain may have somehow become incapacitated or injured, and was unable to tell everyone that their safest option was to stay on the vessel. But the missing crew and passengers were never found, and their fate remains a mystery. 7. Carroll A. Deering. Built in Maine in 1919, the 5-masted schooner Carroll A. Deering ferried coal and other cargo between South America, the United States, and the Caribbean. Just 2 years after it hit the seas for the first time, the 255-foot-long, 77.7 meters ship ran into trouble during a storm off the North Carolina coast. Using a megaphone, a crew member told a lightship keeper that the Deering had lost both its anchors and asked him to pass the word on to the ship's owner. It was the last time anyone saw or heard from the crew. 3 days later, the vessel was spotted off Cape Hatteras. It had run aground, but rescue ships were unable to reach it for several days due to the weather conditions. When a crew finally reached the Deering, they were puzzled to see no sign of the captain or crew. The lifeboats were gone, along with the ship's logbook and the crew's personal belongings. It was evident that they had abandoned ship in the middle of preparing the next day's meal, indicating that something suddenly went very wrong. The ship's rudder was disengaged from its stock, and the steering wheel was shattered. To this day, the crew's fate remains a mystery. Some believe that perhaps pirates or communists kidnapped the ship's crew, while others blamed bad weather. But we'll probably never know for sure. After failing to salvage the Carroll A. Deering, the Coast Guard declared the ship a navigational hazard and blew it up with dynamite. 6. Ocean Wave. On July 9, 1975, Dutch artist Bas Jan Adder departed from Cape Cod, Massachusetts for a solo transatlantic voyage in a 13-foot, 4 meters sailboat called the Ocean Wave. He expected the journey to Falmouth, England to take around 2.5 months. It might sound crazy to attempt sailing in such a tiny boat across an often unforgiving ocean, but that was exactly the point. If Adder completed the trip, the Ocean Wave would set the new world record for the smallest boat to cross the Atlantic. But he failed to reach his destination on time. And as the months passed with no sign of him or the boat, people began to suspect that he either wrecked at sea or staged his own disappearance. Some clues to Adder's fate finally came in May 1976, when the crew of a Spanish fishing trawler found the Ocean Wave off the Irish coast. It was partially submerged and covered in barnacles, indicating that it had been adrift for at least 6 months. Crew members from the trawler boarded the boat and found rotten food and some of Adder's personal belongings, but he was nowhere to be found. The fishermen towed the Ocean Wave to Spain, but it was stolen before any investigative work could be carried out. Adder's body was never recovered, and there were numerous theories about what might have happened to him. During an interview with Avalanche Art magazine in 1985, his wife, Mary Sue Adder, said that she was fully confident that her husband didn't purposely harm himself in any way or run away and start a new life. Considering the size of his boat and the conditions of the Atlantic, all signs point toward him dying in an unfortunate accident at sea. Some people are terrified by the idea of sailing across an ocean alone. To others, it sounds freeing and enjoyable. How do you feel? Let us know in the comments below. But first, be sure to subscribe. 5. MV High Aim 6. In January 2003, members of the Australian Navy spotted an 80-foot, 24.4 meters fishing vessel called the High Aim 6, drifting aimlessly in the Indian Ocean. A team of sailors went on board to investigate and found that nothing seemed out of place. There were no signs of foul play, and the ship's valuable tuna cargo was left untouched. But things didn't exactly add up either. The ship was at full throttle. Its main gas tank was empty, and its auxiliary tanks had not been activated. The entire crew was missing, and their mysterious absence led to speculation that they had fallen victim to a mutiny. Personal belongings left behind at the scene suggested that nobody had planned to leave the ship for any reason, suggesting that someone caught the crew off guard and forced them off of it. A few months earlier, the High Aim 6 had sailed out of Taiwan for Indonesia, where it picked up 8 crew members. From there, the vessel departed for the Marshall Islands. The last contact with the ship happened about 3 weeks before it was found adrift off northwestern Australia, far from its last known location. Craig Kennedy, who lives along the coast, told the New York Times that mutinies weren't unheard of when it came to Indonesian boat crews operating under Chinese captains. He said that one of the only things missing from the High Aim 6 was a high-frequency radio, which would normally suggest that the crew may have fallen victim to pirates. But nothing valuable was taken, and there were no signs of a struggle. Investigators discovered that a cell phone belonging to the ship's engineer had recently made calls from Indonesia. Further evidence indicated that as many as 10 men had been recruited to carry out a mutiny on the ship. Detectives were only able to track down one of the recruits, who claimed that the mutineers had killed the captain and the engineer. He provided few other details and offered no motive for the crime. 4. SV Seabird, one of the earliest known sightings of a ghost ship along what would eventually become the east coast of the United States, came in 1750 when a vessel called the SV Seabird ran aground at full sail on a Rhode Island beach during its return voyage from Honduras. According to some of the most popular versions of the story that's been handed down over the centuries, the ship was found near the shore with minimal damage and coffee brewing in the galley. There was no evidence of foul play or a life or death emergency. Yet, the entire 8-member crew had vanished completely. They left behind a dog and a cat, who were found alive and unharmed. But there are conflicting accounts of the story, and it's unclear which details are factual. In 2014, an anthropology blogger called Esoter researched the Seabird. The findings revealed at least 3 reported years for when the ship ran aground: 1750, 1760, and 1860. One version of the story claims that there was a parakeet aboard the ship, in addition to the dog and cat. The name of the vessel's captain has been listed as John Huxham, John Husham, and John Durham. There are also varying claims about what happened to the Seabird after it was discovered. In some narratives, it sailed or drifted off into the ocean on its own and was never seen again. According to other accounts, the ship was salvaged and used as a commercial vessel for many years. One version holds that the Seabird was captured by the British, renamed, and converted into an armed military ship. Researchers have managed to identify details that are more likely than others to be true. For example, the ship's owner is often identified in stories as a privateer or merchant named Isaac Steele. Historical records show that a man by that name was in Rhode Island in 1747, which fits the general timeline for the Seabird's mysterious appearance on the beach. And while various other pieces of information point toward the legend of the ship being rooted in a true event, experts will probably never be able to fully pick apart fact from fiction. 3. Bel Amica. In 2006, the Italian Coast Guard discovered what appeared to be an antique sailing vessel called the Bel Amica drifting off the Sardinian coast. A boarding crew found piles of clothing, a half-eaten meal, French maps of North African bodies of water, and the flag of Luxembourg, a tiny landlocked European country situated between Belgium and Germany. An investigation revealed that the vessel was owned by a man from Luxembourg named Franck Royaroux, but it had never been registered in any country. Detectives also realized that the Bel Amica wasn't an antique ship after all, but a modern boat worth around $600,000. It was in perfect condition, begging the obvious question of why it was found drifting in the Mediterranean with nobody aboard. The Bel Amica didn't match the description of any vessels that had recently been reported stolen or missing, leading authorities to suspect that Rio had abandoned it on purpose to avoid paying taxes on it. He denied the allegation, claiming that he anchored it in deep water and returned to Luxembourg to deal with a family emergency. Rio said that he planned to return to the yacht as soon as he had taken care of things back home. Authorities didn't seem to buy his story, but it's unclear whether they ever got to the bottom of the situation. 2. MT Jian Seng. In early 2006, an Australian Coast Watch aircraft spotted a drifting ship southwest of Queensland in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Customs officials boarded the derelict 262-foot, 80 meters vessel and found no crew members aboard. There were no signs of illegal activity, violence, or distress, and there was no evidence to suggest that anyone had been on the ship any time recently. The boarding party identified it as the MT Jian Seng, but they were unable to determine the ship's nationality or port of registry. It was inoperable and had a broken tow rope hanging from its bow, indicating that it was being towed when the rope severed. The ship was most likely abandoned at sea. A large supply of rice on board suggested that the vessel may have been used to resupply fishing boats. With no owners coming forward to claim the Jian Seng in the weeks following its discovery, Australian authorities towed it to deep waters and scuttled it. 1. SV Kaz II. In April 2007, Captain Des Batten and his brothers Peter and John Tunstead set sail in a 39-foot-long, 12 meters, catamaran called the Kaz II, with plans to spend the next 2 months sailing around Australia. They began the voyage from the Whitsunday Islands off the Queensland coast and headed toward Western Australia, where they all lived. But the trio didn't get very far. Just 3 days later, the Kaz II was found idling roughly 100 miles, 161 kilometers off the country's eastern coast, near the Great Barrier Reef. The vessel appeared to be in good condition, other than a ripped sail. But Batten and his sailing partners had vanished, leaving behind scattered newspapers, a laptop, clothing, and other personal belongings. There were also no signs of foul play, but there was a half-empty cup of coffee on the boat, indicating that something unexpectedly interrupted an otherwise normal day. Some people speculated that the brothers had encountered pirates or drug smugglers. Others theorized that they staged their disappearance as part of a scam to collect insurance money. The missing men were never found. An inquest concluded that Peter and John Tunstead most likely fell overboard while trying to untangle a fishing lure from the boat's propeller, and that Batten probably fell overboard trying to rescue his brothers. A coroner determined that the 3 missing sailors died in a freak accident, but in the absence of their bodies, and because the ruling was made based on circumstantial evidence, some people continue to suspect that something more deliberate or sinister occurred. To Des, Peter, and John, sailing around Australia sounded like the trip of a lifetime. Thanks for watching. What did you think of these ships that disappeared without a trace? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.